And there was a moment where a teacher actually drew a bell curve and colored in the bottom left side of the bell curve and said, "You guys belong here." And I remember being slightly insulted by it because that was his way of inspiring us. I was befuddled and slightly insulted.
Hello and welcome to the Advanced Podcast. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Yi Xian, Group Chief Executive Officer of EtonHouse International Education Group. EtonHouse, for those that don't know it, is one of Asia's most recognized education groups with about 100 schools across Asia. As a second-generation leader and son of founder Dr. Kim Chu, Yi Xian has driven the group's expansion through new brands, including the Middleton International School, the Eton Academy, and Elevate After School Care, while leading the group's digital transformation also. His leadership was recognized with a Next Icon Award in 2024 for technological innovation within a family enterprise. Before joining EtonHouse, Yi Xian built his career in finance in the United States. That background has brought strong strategic discipline to how he leads and grows the group today. What makes Yi Xian a particularly compelling guest is the tension at the heart of his story. As a student, he was once told that his entire class ranked in the bottom 10th percentile of his age group. He says it stuck with him because it was an incredibly odd way to try to inspire students. Coming from someone who now leads over 100 schools, that is worth taking note of. Outside of work, he's the father of three and a passionate advocate for mindfulness. He's currently reading about Jensen Huang and NVIDIA, drawn to the belief that great companies are built in decades, not years. His favorite film is Free Solo, the story of a man who attempts what most would consider impossible, and listens to Lose Yourself by Eminem when he needs to push through. That combination of long-term thinking, relentless execution, and a refusal to quit says a great deal about the leader sitting across from us today. Yi Xian, it is a real pleasure to have you with us on this podcast. Yi Xian, welcome to the Advanced Podcast. As you know, we're focused on the subject of high performance. But before we get to your leadership and what is happening at EtonHouse, can you tell me a little bit about education in Southeast Asia? Give us the contours in which you operate. I think that would be quite interesting for our listeners.
Oh, thank you, Vikas, and it's a pleasure to be on. So I lead EtonHouse International Education Group. What we do is we operate affordable and premium preschools and international schools. So throughout the entire world, we have about 100 schools of those four types: affordable, premium, and preschools and international schools. Most of my schools are preschools, but I operate more than 40 schools in Singapore, more than 30 schools in China, and a handful of schools in Malaysia, Singapore, and throughout the region. So I think, we have a rough sense of understanding around Asia. We also just opened up 2 schools in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, and we're opening up a new K-12 school in Bangkok. So I think what I would share is that, similar to the rest of the world, you're really seeing private education step up. We do have some pretty big variances with regards to whether local citizens can go to international K-12 schools. So for example, in Singapore and China, local nationals are not allowed to go to international schools. Whereas in countries such as Malaysia, Thailand, as well as, let's say, Saudi Arabia, there are no such restrictions.
And why do you think private schools are flourishing in the region?
Well, there's a combination of, families are having less children. East Asians have always been very passionate about education, along with South Asians. And so that the need for academic rigor is something which, we don't need to educate parents on. They're very passionate about them. I think digging deeper into your question, the world of private education means that there's a lot more choice for parents. So, for example, in Bangkok, you have one of the most flourishing markets for K-12 international schools. Parents have to decipher the difference between what is an American program, a British program, what the IBPYP is, whether what's a Singapore program. And so parents have to make these choices very early in life. Whereas a similar parent in Singapore, which doesn't allow our students to go into international schools, they have no choice in this regard. So So parents actually have a lot more, sometimes you can say have to do a little bit more work. And unfortunately, sometimes it all comes down to word of mouth. Yeah.
And in terms of Yi Xian, I mean, Singapore has a pretty terrific brand as a result of things like the pizza, tables and such forth. What is it that distinguishes a Singaporean education?
Well, Singapore math is very famous, and it's famous because of this concept of heuristics and that the student has to actually do. So let me give a tangible example to this. Algebra is something that is taught in secondary schools all around the world when a child is 12 or 13 years old. In Singapore, we have an exam which decides which secondary school you can go to. And this is a very fundamental part of the Singapore system, where we try to cut away from people's socioeconomic status and give people a more equal opportunity. And this exam does introduce a lot of stress to students, but is probably the linchpin to this meritocratic system. And Singapore math encapsulates, but because the tests have to get more and more complex in order to actually give people differentiation of a score, we actually end up giving students algebra questions when they are 12 years old without teaching them algebra. You and I will solve these questions with algebra, but what they have to do is that they use a part method, and this is a heuristic that is very unique to the Singapore system. But people have actually criticized the system for being complex for the sake of complex, but actually it is a deeper type of problem solving. So Singaporeans, we as a people are very pragmatic when we look at things. I think maybe there's an inner budding engineer inside every single Singaporean, the way how we look at problems. But yeah, Singapore math is a big part of this. I think the other part of this is the differentiation and the streaming. So this is, it could be controversial among educators, but what it is that from a very early point, Singapore decided that they're going to stream students into the right class and the right academic profile of what is suitable for him or her, so that the teacher will be able to teach students of roughly equivalent academic levels. And so how does a system actually do this? There was an element of a blunt force instrument where people were basically streamed into three big streams. In recent years, the system has become more accommodating to allow people to take different difficulty, each subject is now broken up into three different streams. Previously, if let's say you were, very academically gifted, but you weren't good in a certain subject, you had to take all your subjects at a certain level, at the highest level. So now the system is actually accommodated learners of different profiles. And so that's a good thing. But for many years, this level of differentiation has enabled teachers to actually scale. Yeah.
And in terms of we know about Singapore maths, we know about the streaming. What about things like, I hear that the policy interventions in early childhood, as an example, are quite progressive and very advanced for what in other parts of the world, if you compare. Or if you take teacher education as an example, these are areas that also Singapore excels in. Do you have a view on those two things?
Yeah, I've had a front row seat in terms of two of the countries in the world that have actually transformed the early childhood sectors. So when I mean front row seat, I mean I'm an operator. So we operate affordable preschools in Singapore as well as in China. In the last decade, both of these countries have changed the entire landscape in early childhood. Today, more than 80% of students in these two countries are going to government-funded affordable preschools. And this has been done and accomplished. In China, it was a case where the public system supplemented with a smaller private system that has mandated to actually offer more affordable fees. has scaled up affordable supply. In Singapore, what has happened is slightly similar, but the public role is actually very small. The bigger role was the government appointed 5 operators called anchor operators, of which we are one, to scale up supply very rapidly. So I have today about 32 schools that did not exist 11 years ago, some of which can hold 800 preschool-age children with 80 infants from the age of 2 months old up to 17 months old in one of these schools. In fact, we have almost 1,000 infants today. And these schools were built from scratch, and this ramp happened within 11 years. And for 3 or 4 years, actually, this was halted during COVID. So you can imagine this sense of scale that's what happened. As far as I know, nowhere else in the world has undertaken such a ramp. And it is because both countries have realized that the early years matter. The longitudinal outcomes for interventions in early years matter. Singapore is now at the point where the scale up of affordable early child education has been accomplished. Now we're looking at how we define quality as a sector, and we're also looking at neurodiversity. So what can we do to have inclusive preschools to actually help the neurodiverse population?
That's fantastic to hear. And Yi Xian, in terms of like when you look at learning outcomes, say in your system of schools, I assume you do very well simply because you've grown quite significantly over the many years. So it begs the question in terms of how you define or how can you help us think through what makes a great school?
I could give you a very quantitative answer to this, which is very Singaporean. But I mean, to me, it's actually a lot more qualitative. When I walk into a school, the first thing I do is actually see what's on the walls. I mean, obviously, if there are going to be students in the school, you're going to actually see how the students behave.
Yes.
Yeah. Do they say hello to you? How are they treating one another? How are they treating the teachers? My favorite schools, the students actually come up to me and go, "Hey, what are you doing here?" Because it shows agency. It shows that they really care about their school. If unfortunately I'm coming to a school without students, actually I'll see what's on the walls. Do I see things that are printed off from the internet that just slapped on the walls to show you examples of what students should be learning, to show you fancy concepts up there? I've actually gone to schools around the world where I was a grade 1 class, and they had E equals to MC squared slapped onto the wall. Things that were printed from the internet. And I looked at it and I said, I know what it is. I cannot explain to you in terms of physics what it is. I bet you, unless the 7-year-old is very, very special, they can explain this to you or even claim any agency towards that, let alone apply it. And so to me, I really look around at what's on the walls, what height they put it, and is it really a student's work? Unfortunately, a lot of the time you see adults plagiarizing students' work to make it look like students' work. And sometimes I'll get the chance to actually I do a little thought experiment where can I figure out what the class is actually inquiring on? Can I figure out at that point in time what subjects have they really delved into in the inquiry projects and what are they working on? And that's actually always a little fun detective mystery for me. And if I can, then I know that it's a good school.
And this podcast, as I said earlier, is all about advancing, high performance in schools because that's what we need. And when you run a system of schools like you do and across multiple countries, what systems have you created that actually drives this high performance across the entire system? Would be curious to know about what you have done or if there are any specific insights you may have for those that are listening to this podcast as to what they can replicate from EtonHouse.
One thing that COVID gave us the gift of time. And one thing that my team and I did during COVID was to think about this Jim Collins concept of the flywheel. This is one of those things that many of us have read, but none of us have actually applied, which is most knowledge, frankly. And I sat down with my team and I asked everyone, do we know what are the elements of what we have always done since day zero that have made us successful? And we played around the different building blocks. And it was actually my CFO who actually realized that the thing that starts everything off is actually a great pedagogy. And the elements of a pedagogy which are inquiry-based, which are student-centered, which is the bilingual or trilingual approaches. For my preschools, they're very graduate influenced. So this element of applied learning for the older levels. So this starts off with a unique pedagogy for us. Then it comes down to people. We have great school leaders. More than half of my school leaders in Singapore have worked with my family and I for more than a decade. On top of that, we have committed teachers. And then the third part is partners, whether they're landlords, whether they're government agencies. The way we look at it is if our pedagogy, our people, and our partners are all student-centered, then we are able to deliver a sustainable profit that we're able to reinvest back into the organization, that we're able to donate to our charity, and we're able to pay off our shareholder, which in this case is one individual, my mother. And what I would push back when people look at high performance is unfortunately or fortunately, other than academic results, there are many kinds of great schools out there in this world. To really ask ourselves, hey, what is it that have made us successful since day zero? And to try and quantify elements of this. And so for us, it's really our flywheel. And it's something which we're quite proud about. And it's something that we want to be intellectually honest, so we keep re-examining.
And so, like in preparation for this interview, we send all our guests a questionnaire. And one of the things we ask them for is what are your top 3 lessons for high performance? Yi Xian, why don't we go through yours at this stage? Tell us about your first.
I wish I remembered them. But I think the biggest lesson that I have learned is there's only so much you can do in 1 year, but you can change the world in 10 years. And in this search for high performance, in this search for execution, it's actually very important to give thanks and to actually celebrate our wins. So I think for many years I've been driven by whenever we achieve our win, the next thing I go is like, okay, what's the next problem to solve? And I think in terms of religion, I guess I will consider myself a very reluctant Buddhist. And there is an attribute that they have for this, which is a sympathetic joy. So we must celebrate the joys of not just ourselves, but that of others. And I think this is actually something which all organizations, the more quantified you become, the more you might forget to celebrate these wins. And arguably, these wins might become performative in nature. And so I think it's important for us to actually take the time to celebrate these wins, give people that acknowledgement, help people feel seen, and to actually feel the wins ourselves. I think that's probably the biggest lesson that I've learned in terms of high performance.
And how do you stave off parental pressure? In many schools and school systems, parents are relentless in terms of getting grades and all that kind of thing. And how does the message go down when you say to them, be patient?
Well, because one of my schools has won the top 3 school prize for student well-being a few years ago. And what we position this to parents is actually when your child feels well, your child will do well. That same school, 40% of our students A-level results are either A or A star. It's something that we're very proud about. And it is because of our student well-being program that our students have been able to do so well. I think from a human level also, if our students are cognitively brilliant, but morally or in terms of the heart bankrupt, I think we have done them a disservice. I think the other thing I would share is that, you see little wins and little beautiful stories out there. I heard a story the other day about how I think it was a 7-year-old who fell asleep on the bus and woke up in a place that the person, she had no idea where she was. And so she found the kindest space that she could find and then asked the person, hey, could you bring me back to Middleton International School? And this person brought her back to the school. And when she came into the school, the police were there, her parents were there, everyone was panicking. And when her mother saw her, she just broke down in tears. And the hilarious thing was the 7-year-old student was comforting her mother and saying, mother, it's okay, don't cry, I'm here. So What I thought was just so beautiful about this moment is, life isn't just about academic results. We all know that there's some very brilliant people out there. Maybe the term is failure to launch. Maybe the term is they've had many struggles through life. So yeah, the individual is not just based on academic results alone. So I think parents understand that. It's more about how do you help them, uh, how do you open up a conversation in a way where it's not lecturing you, it's whether it's a discovery that people have already made.
Academic excellence begins with a great school culture. Vision, leadership, and a positive working environment are the keys to success. It's all part of the hidden curriculum. But how can your institution prove that it passes the test? Welcome to Best School to Work, your guide and beacon for great school culture. Imagine a future where schools shine and teachers thrive. Our certification program empowers schools to create a positive culture that stands out from the rest. While detailed guidance and expert-led courses allow schools to keep improving their culture, achieving certification will put your school on the map. Best School to Work is the gold standard of school culture. Together, let's transform education. Join Best School to Work and create a brighter future for our schools, students, and educators. Start your journey today.
Yi Xian, I'm poking a little bit of mischief at you here, so please recognize it as that. And those that are listening know that I am testing Yi Xian a little bit over here. There is opinion out there that what you're doing is contrary to brand Singapore. With regards to your approach to learning and student centricity and thinking through the pastoral care side of things, given the features that sometimes we hear about Singaporean education. And in fact, the last time I was in Singapore many years ago, I remember an interview by the then minister talking about how rote learning, all the pressure that goes on to children, and the curriculum offering need to expand. I mean, do you have a comment on why you've gone down this particular pathway, and truly as a pioneer more than anything else, when you could have just replicated what Singapore sees as its success?
Because I think you've hit on something that I would completely agree upon. I was a product of that system. I was a product. I think one of the deeper memories I have is I went to a very at that time it seemed like a median secondary school. What it actually was, because today I sit on its school advisory committee, I realize it's definitely on the bottom 20 percentile. But when you're a student, you don't know. And there was a moment where a teacher actually drew a bell curve and colored in the bottom left side of the bell curve and said, you guys belong here. And I remember being slightly insulted by it because that was his way of inspiring us. I was befuddled and slightly insulted. I actually did well from that point in time. But I think maybe the honest truth is that I am a product of a system that is specialized in route learning that is in the recent years becoming more centrist in its approach. And I think over the last 11 years, I've been bringing my organization, which was already not very right wing, more centrist also. So I think the reality is that all education systems change over time. Indeed, change takes time. Singapore as a country, we are a victim of our own success. When you're number one in your PISA scores, it is very difficult to move. But that's the beauty of private systems. Private systems are able to scale quickly. We're able to change our programs to adapt to what parents need. And even in terms of AI, what we've managed to accomplish in just a matter of months surpasses that of many countries.
Well, let's go to your second lesson for high performance.
Well, I think for us, when you think about innovation, I think Jim Collins again, we talked about firing a cannonball firing a bullet before you fire a cannonball. Perhaps I can show an example involving AI around this. About 2.5 years ago, when ChatGPT 3 came out, I had a team come up to me and say, "Hey, we want to actually help our teachers do lesson planning using AI. What do you think?" And I said, "That sounds like a wonderful idea, but please make sure that you do a pilot program first before we scale this out, because I can. There are all these things I could potentially think about, whether teachers don't have the ability to learn, or they don't have the time to learn. This could seem scary." And I said, "Let's touch base in 2 weeks." No, in 2 weeks' time, we sat down, and then my team said, "Hey, by the way, we scaled this out across all 30 schools in eBridge." And my jaw dropped. And I said, "Oh my God, what have we done?" And then it took me a second before I realized that indeed, this was something that was teacher facing. Indeed, they scaled it out because the ground was saying, "This is the amazing tool. I want it now." I actually shortchanged our teachers on this. I forgot that a lot of the time, especially in preschools, teachers work in teaching teams where they don't know how something works. They turn to the colleagues, and the colleagues help them. And it was a slam dunk success. I had these misconceptions where I thought that it was our teachers who were new to inquiry-based learning that were going to love this program the most. But actually, it was our second language teachers who would love this the most. And so what happened was, for example, if you are a Tamil teacher in Singapore, the Tamil population in Singapore is less than 10%. How do you find age-appropriate content for your students? And so with AI can give you current events in Tamil that are applicable for a child of any age. And but it's important, of course, that the teacher, as the adult, reviews this to see whether it is truly appropriate for his or her class. And so indeed, the bullet, I hoped for a tiny bullet. I got a much bigger bullet than I anticipated, but for good reasons. And then from there on, we decided to build out a lot more features, to build out report writing, now we're building out a tool where how can you do classroom observations to actually give feedback, not evaluations, but to actually give those observations as feedback points to teachers. And I think sometimes you recognize that these tests don't always work. And is this element where, we tell our children, we tell our students, you have to be risk takers, the IB learner, it's part of the IB learner profile, but yet as adults, no one likes to fail. So it's one of these biggest hypocrisies of education, but it's something that we constantly challenge ourselves at.
So you've spoken about two things which are quite important. One is appreciating that change takes time. And your second lesson is, I think what you're saying is you need to build a great team around you. And empower them to take action. Your third point, which I want to delve into much deeper, and I know there's a lot of interest, and you're a practitioner of mindfulness. Do you want to speak about that as a tool that you have as a leader to make sure that you yourself are thinking straight, behaving in a particular way, and actually giving you the energy that you require to drive improvement and to lead your system? Do you want to speak about that?
Well, there was a point in time where I used to be a hedge fund analyst. And I remember the first time I walked into a mindfulness session, it was like another world, and I wasn't ready for it at all. I think I kind of asked the question along the lines of, so how long do I have to do this before I become Buddha or something like that? So it didn't work. It didn't land at all. I think I just thought it was very, if I had to use a word, weird. Fast forward years later, when I first came into EtonHouse, and that was 11 years ago. Schools are networks of human beings and relationships, and it can be complex. And it was something that was quite difficult for me to understand. And I stumbled upon mindfulness, and it was a great help to me. I probably wouldn't be here talking to you today if it wasn't for my mindfulness practice. But I think when it comes down to, people like to trivialize mindfulness, or maybe the opposite of trivialize, they kind of make it as something that's very big. The reality is that we all need to find some way, shape, or form to recharge. And when we thought about how do we implement such a program for our students, we looked at the research, and the research is very clear. The success of any mindfulness-based program is dependent on if the teacher has a practice him or herself. Because the students are very intelligent, they can actually see whether the teachers actually believe in this or not. And so based on that, we actually rolled out a program that intervenes with our teachers first and foremost. We believe that high performance, or honestly just longevity, is predicated on us all having a practice to recharge. And so I'm very lucky that my school leaders and I share the same approach. I will be very honest and share that not all schools in the EtonHouse group actually launched the same program. And that's because our different schools are more receptive and other schools are less receptive. And so for us, we meet people where they are. For me personally and for all of my leaders, we don't make this mandatory. If you are ready, then we open up the doors for you. I do believe that things have to be very secular. I believe that once, if we force religion upon our staff, things get very difficult very quickly. And you also have to, like, certain people feel stronger about their faith. And that is something that's very personal. So we allow people to step out if they don't feel comfortable.
But how do you actually practice mindfulness?
Well, I think the easiest way to do this is to actually bring it down to the lowest common denominator. I have started meetings by actually doing a mini meditation session. And what I mean by this is, like, it could be just 30 seconds. I could ask everyone to take one breath in together and to release it together, and then to take another breath in together and then say, hey, breathing in, I calm my body and mind. Breathing out, I smile. Okay, let's start the meeting. Yeah, it could be as simple as that. And the reality is that when you're trying to scale something out, just meet people where they're at. How can we expect our students to sit for 30 minutes when adults won't even sit for 2 minutes without pulling out their phone? So it takes time. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing this, actually, Yi Xian. And you take me to another subject and more technological in conversation for this podcast, which is around, you just touched on it, which is about addiction to devices. In the world today, you will see there's this practice of banning social media for under 16-year-olds. There's this whole move to take devices away from kids in schools. Where do you land on this?
I think my opinion that would be interesting additive to this discussion is actually to be slightly contrarian on this. I don't discount or disagree any of the research that's come out. My fear is that we become too scared to make change. What I mean by this is the conversation about mobile phones and social media has rolled forth into things like AI. So I've heard of this this logic where we have failed our children in social media and with mobile phones. We're not going to fail them again in AI, and therefore we're not going to do anything because we don't want to be wrong. And that's something that's very scary to me. The reality is that we cannot be 99.99% correct about every decision that we make in life. And at the same time, when there's certain things that are happening around us that we know are the future, we have to introduce this to children and students. Like, so take, for example, when it comes out to AI, I would argue that your median educator wants to basically do nothing because that's the safest course possible. And the reality is that, like, vibe coding is here to stay. I have introduced vibe coding workshops in my own company. And it's something that was very scary for people. But once you actually introduce this to people and gave people that space to play, people loved it. And so much agency was there. And I can't think of another tool in recent years that's given just anyone the agency to create anything. Now, granted, at the same time, there have been guardrails for the organization. You cannot launch enterprise-grade solutions from a crazy person that's just vibe coding all day long without anyone looking at the code and the security of it. But I just feel that this conversation can veer so much in the realm of safety that we forget about progress.
I have, as you can imagine, with all our connectivity, Yi Xian, lots of people speak to me about, especially in the world of edtech, about actually where the rubber hits the road is a school, and they want to try to get their tools adopted by schools. And they say to me that it's so difficult to get into private schools. And so, do you have any advice for them?
Well, I guess the first one is never stop. So your persistence definitely matters. I think the other thing is, word of mouth definitely matters. I think once you have one school group on board and they're out there singing your praises, it definitely helps a lot. I think the other thing is it really a pain point that schools have? I think very often EdTech can go out there and try and create a solution for a problem that is not exactly even a top 10 list of problems that schools have. And that's something which I feel has plagued EdTech for many years. And I think it's also useful for tech founders to realize just how much inbound emails that we receive. As a CEO of a reasonably sized education group, the number of emails I receive about all the solutions out there is truly astonishing. And I will not be shy to share that if you send me an email, I don't know who you are, the second or third time and you are very pushy, I will spam block you. And that's for my own sanity, not for yours. It's nothing personal. And so, with that in mind, I feel like there's just so much, like, how do you differentiate yourself against that pack? For example, LMS solutions. I mean, like, how many million solutions are there out there? And I am certainly not the person that's going to be the one making the decision on what's the right one. So I think it's actually worth being very critical with themselves. Actually, how are you truly differentiating yourself against the pack? And I think the last thing I'd say about this is, please don't misspell my name.
Fully understand. We should talk a little bit about how you see the future of the company and your schools. I know that there's this move to internationalize further, but there's also this characteristic that you're developing, which is being very tech enabled. So tell us where both of these streams go.
Well, I think for me, for many years, I was so we're funded by a single person, my mother, who's our sole shareholder. It's a very unique, beautiful position to be in. And for many years, I've been going up against global giants around the world. And it took me a while before I realized I'm going up against global private equity. And the reality is that we've been very successful in our home grounds. But there comes a point where K-12 international schools require capital. And so our solution to this is we launched a private equity fund last year. And it's a very different approach to everyone else. So we're not here to roll up schools. We're actually here to be an operator-enabled private equity fund. So the beautiful thing about this is EtonHouse is seeding assets all over the world at cost. And we're selling at cost these assets into the private equity fund. And these are new assets. And because of the way how we're structuring this, our investors are able to enter these assets at a very, very cheap multiple upon the mid-cycle EBITDA that these assets will make. And that's really my expression of what I wish existed in the private equity world as a family office myself. And so my schools in Saudi Arabia and Thailand will be funded on this model. And the future growth of my company is going to be built on this model. When it comes down to tech, what I would say is that I didn't go out there and seek to try and create a tech company. We have our first agreement for a truly external customer, not in our group, that fell into our hands. When you build a good product and you are in the sector, I guess people come. And that's something that is of surprise to even us internally. And I think for us, our passion is really how do we create the best products for our students and for our team. And if we do a good job there, I believe people will come. So that's a pleasant surprise. I still have no ambitions to create some kind of edtech behemoth, but I guess that's my 1 year statement. So let's touch base in 10 years.
And, I want to end this conversation through this lens of family business. You, in the end, like you referenced, that your mother is your sole shareholder. She founded this organization. I had the honor and pleasure of meeting her earlier this year, where we awarded her with the Education Leaders Forum Fellowship. And what struck me was, there's many families and many that try to make this transition from being founder-led to the next generation. Tell us about how your family prepared for that, and what is making it work. I'm pretty sure it's not easy, and I'm pretty sure it's work in progress. So tell us about what you have deployed as a family that gives advice to others who are thinking about similar situations.
Well, I'm very lucky. I take my mother for granted. She is a very unique individual in the sense of, I think men, we tend to identify ourselves based on our profession. And women wear many hats in life. And in some ways, they are more ready to actually take on hats and take off hats. And my mother realized, and she shared this publicly, that it came to a point where she couldn't identify with the parents coming to our school because she realized that she was the age of their parents. And, and so she knew that by the time I showed up 11 years ago. I would say that for me, it was a journey. It's a very typical family business next generation story of first resistance, followed by acceptance, followed by ownership. And the reality is that when you show up in the organization, and I think this applies to professional managers too. In the beginning, you have all these things that you're not happy about. Why are things this way? It's wrong. Well, a couple of years roll by, and then you realize that you have agency on those decisions too. Either you have made a decision that I don't know how to solve this problem, or this is already the best solution to a problem that we have. And then that's the point where ownership happens, where you realize that I have an equal part to play in persisting this problem or not being able to find a solution to this problem. And I find that that's something which all of us have to walk this journey of just leading and managing. For me personally, I was lucky enough to find purpose in what I do. It was via a meditation retreat. So I was lucky to actually get to a point in meditation where I realized the reason why I'm in this life is to run and operate these schools. So that's my life purpose. I don't believe that anyone and everyone has to go down the same route. But I do believe that I think Arthur Brooks has kind of figured something out in the sense of all of us need some sense of work and purpose. All of us need family, friends, and to give back, service. And so these four elements, purpose, family, friends, and service, it's a portfolio. And when I mean portfolio, I mean that we cannot over-invest in one element all throughout our lives. And it's a beautiful thing if all four elements of our life are able to flourish. And so, yeah, it's something which it's one of those beautiful things about life, right? What the answer for me might not be the same for the answer for someone else. It's choose your own adventure.
Yi Xian, I'm going to end this conversation with a very large question. And it is large because I'm sure there are gazillions of parents around the world who are grappling with this issue. And we look for you for your leadership in this regard. So the question is, how do we prepare young people for the future of work as a result of everything that you observe outside in society, including the advent of AI in the workplace?
Well, first of all, I think our teachers have to take the lead in terms, I think first of all, it's management. Management has to take the lead on saying we have to experiment with all the new tools out there and to be able to give teachers the agency, the budget, and the freedom. And it's not a blank check, but it's one which is like there's safeguards that are there. But we have to be able to explore these tools. And it is a brave new world. Take, for example, AI. A lot of us are struggling to actually find age-appropriate content out there. But actually, MIT is actually made available for free a program called Day of AI or Day in AI out there. And so it's just a matter of actually putting our heads out of the well and looking around and seeing what's out there that people are actually applying to meet students where they're at and where they need to be at. I think that's the fundamental thing, to meet them where they're at. And I think, after spoken about social emotional well-being, whenever we say that the world is a very scary VUCA place, the reality is that the world has always been a scary VUCA place. We can concede that the velocity of change is increasing, that we will all concede. But let's not kid ourselves that in the arc of history, it has never been a straight line that everyone can forecast. And if anything, I think this discussion about student well-being exists because we have realized that it is important. And so let's not ignore that. It is of equal importance to academic results.
Yi Xian, you have shared quite a few insights across this interview, which I'm really grateful to you for. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to a future edition of Advancement. We can have you back on and hear about all the progress that EtonHouse has made, not just in Southeast Asia but across the world. So, thank you once again, and I really appreciate you taking the time for this interview.
Yeah, thank you, Vikas. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Advanced Podcast with Yi Xian, Group Chief Executive Officer of EtonHouse International Education Group. We discussed what it takes to build great schools at scale, why operators and not financiers should lead education investment in Asia, and what the region's education crisis looks like from inside 100 schools across 9 countries. Yi Xian shared his top 3 lessons for high performance in education. First, appreciate that change takes time. You can only do so much in 1 year, but you can change the world in 10. That does not mean you stop trying. It means you stay relentless while keeping your eyes on the big picture. And as Yi Xian reminds us, change compounds. Once things start moving, you may be surprised at what you have built. Second, build a mindfulness practice. Running so many schools in so many countries is an enormous cognitive load. For Yi Xian, mindfulness is not a wellness trend. It is how he stays clear, present, and able to make better decisions under pressure. And finally, build a great team and pay them well. No one moves mountains alone. The quality of the people around you is ultimately quality of what you can achieve. Yi Xian, thank you for joining us and for sharing your wisdom and experience with us today.